And hi, I'm Benjamin Morgan, the Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and I welcome you back for our Wednesday, 7th of October news and discussion broadcast. This evening, we're going to be joined by Tony White and John Smith of the Sport Aircraft Association of Australia to have a discussion about a recent submission that the association has put forward to the Senate Regional Affairs Transport Committee's inquiry into general aviation. The Sport Aircraft Association of Australia believes that the current direction of Australia's general aviation regulatory development and how regulation is administered exacerbates the proliferation of differing standards for the same or similar applications or functions, that is pilot medicals, pilot instructor ratings and aircraft maintenance. It believes that there is an ever-increasing complexity of regulations and that there is a cost burden of administering these regulations at the expense of more effective safety risk mitigation activities. They also believe that these collectively deliver a questionable safety improvement. And this evening we've invited the SAAA along to have a conversation about this submission and also to dispel some myths. So without too much further ado, we'll join the two gentlemen in. Thank you very much, John and Tony, for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
That's okay. So I just want to do some housekeeping and just put a couple of statements out before we really throw ourselves into this conversation. The first one is that already there were some comments online and concerns as to why tonight's discussion does not have a representative from the Recreational Aviation Australia Limited participating. And I'd cover that by just saying to our members and industry supporters that tonight's discussion is about, I guess, learning and garnering an understanding of exactly what the SAAA submission is all about. And I know that Australian Flying on Friday of last week put forward some editorial and opinion, which was saying that the SAAA was calling for the entire SAAA model to be effectively shut down, which I know I've spoken with both of you. That's not exactly what the submission was about, but needless to say, it did cause a bit of a fury online for the weekend. So this is an opportunity for everybody to hear the SAAA side of this, and I'm sure that we're going to learn a great deal through our conversation. I have extended an invitation to the Recreational Aviation Australia Limited and their chairman, Mr. Michael Monk, for them to participate in a panel discussion next week on Thursday so that we can hear their side of this submission and their thoughts and opinions on that. And so that offer has been made, and we hope that they'll be able to join us next week so that we can get their views. So, gentlemen, I guess the best place to start with this is potentially with Tony. I might throw it straight to you. Tony, obviously, this submission is a response to the Senate RRAT Inquiry, which Senator Susan McDonald, as the chair, has put up. This inquiry is into the current state of Australia's general aviation industry, paying a particular reference to aviation in rural, remote and regional Australia. And so the SAAA response to this has been put forward on behalf of all of your sport and experimental aircraft owners. Could you maybe just give me a little bit of a brief rundown on I guess the high level thinking, and then we might start delving into some direct questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Look, and I have been on your show talking about the medical disparity on a few occasions now, and that is all part of the issue. The high level thinking, how did we get onto this pathway where clubs, which have now become legal limited companies, and that's been, as I understand it, at the behest of CASA and a response to legal liability. How do we get onto this pathway? Well, you've got to cast your mind back to the 90s, and literally there was a problem. It was identified by the Holcroft report, as I understand it, and the government and CASA had to do something about the number of deaths in ultralights. And let me say right up front, once upon a time, SAAA and the ultralight movement were one and the same group of people. But somehow it got separated, egos got in the way, who knows, and they formed another club. But when it comes to the rule making, CASA had to do something as a consequence of the Holcroft report. And so it started to go down this pathway around the late 90s and in the early 2000s under the former DAS Byron at that stage. And so a CAO 9555 was created to administer effectively ultralights the ultralight movement, which became, as we know it today, RAOs, were charged with having to improve things. Now, the real kicker in all of this is when you come back to the regulation and you have a look at the Act, and I don't believe a lot of people really know this, but I've spent a lot of time researching it with my fellow board of directors and technical people. But the RAO's pilot certificate is there to fly an unregisterable aircraft. So all RAO's aircraft, according to the Act, are basically what is deemed by the Act to be unregisterable. Now, a person with a PPL, a basic pilot's license, cannot fly one of those. It's illegal. So CASA and the RAOs had to come up with a mechanism for people to be able to fly these under 600 kilo unregisterable aircraft. So therein lies the birth of the recreational pilot certificate. And isn't it bizarre that the people in RAOs with a recreational pilot certificate, they can't fly a VH registered aircraft of the same weight at below 600 kilos, and nor can a PPL pilot fly an RAOs registered aircraft. But the physics of flight doesn't change. And for anyone to suggest that our brothers and sisters in RAOs are any lesser pilots is just an absolute nonsense. So why?
Well, Tony, I'm going to jump in there because it really is a good juncture to just come across to John for a second. I know, John, in the last couple of days, you and I have had an opportunity to have a bit of a conversation about the SAAA thinking in this submission, and you've been very clear in discussing the fact that we are all pilots in one system. And right now we have an environment where there is inequity on both sides. There's inequity for our recreational colleagues who are not able to fly within controlled airspace and have all these limitations placed on them. And then we have the inequity on the CASA side, in which we have RPL and PPL holders who can't have access to fly the RAO's registered aircraft. So this is, the concept of unification in the industry and bringing an industry together so that it's all working cohesively is really at the center of this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there wouldn't be many people in the industry in Australia that wouldn't agree that there isn't a number of substantial inequities that have been created. And we are one. We are a bunch of aviators, and all we want to do as recreational private pilots is enjoy the freedom of flight. But nevertheless, we're in a situation now where we have different levels of standards required for pilot training, instructor ratings, it's a medical certification, and so it goes on. And it's about time, in our opinion, and we've voiced this opinion for many, many years, we're not getting any traction, certainly with CASA in this regard, that it's about time we leveled the playing field. And if we leveled the playing field, it would free up all the opportunity for example, the pilots that have been unable to continue flying within the VH system, hopefully provide the opportunity for aircraft that have been sitting out there in the hangars just slowly decaying, or out there in the long grass decaying. It's just such a waste of an opportunity. So really what I'm trying to say here is that this goal to level the playing field, it's got nothing to do with just SAAA, far from it. It's all about the thousands and thousands of general aviation, private pilots and aircraft owners that they're just missing out on this opportunity to take advantage of the less onerous standards that RAOs, and I've got to give credit where it's due. I think they did a fantastic job in persuading CASA that their proposals were safe, and CASA obviously agreed with them, and it's great. And it's just such a shame that because of the way this has been established and set up, we end up with this divergence of opportunity. And
well, you said it before, John, and I'll try and paraphrase you as accurately as I can. But you did say that the success of the RAO's system gave birth to reforms which have now demonstrated themselves to be safe. Reforms that, in fact, the broader general aviation industry had already been advocating for many decades prior to that. That now that these reforms are in place, we have this segregation in the industry where only one part of the industry can have access to it, and yet we are disadvantaging thousands of other pilots who now can't access a liberalised and reformed aviation ecosystem because of the way that this split in the industry, I guess, has been created.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel that one has to ask the question, how can this possibly have ever happened in a sophisticated development country such as Australia? It seems bizarre.
Well, Tony, sorry, John, I'm going to be cognizant of time. I'm going to keep throwing some questions across, and I've got the SAAA submission right next to the video screen here, so I'm going to refer to some of these points. But before I get to that, Tony, as John has just said, how did this happen in such a sophisticated environment such as Australia? I mean, the concept of separating and segregating the industry into self-administration blocks has been tried in other countries, and it's actually been reversed.
Yeah, absolutely right, Ben. The reality is the SAAA model, when it was first mooted, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, is now quite different. What we have today is nothing like what we started with 20 plus years ago. And that's very sad. And CASA has continued to drive an outcome that they want. And you can only, I guess, from the demonstration of actions, so it's an empirical investigation, I guess, it looks like CASA is trying to divest itself from everything to do with GA and hand that over to a private regulator. But the problem is that under the Act, and what I was saying about before, where RAOs are flying, according to the Act, unregisterable aircraft under an exemption, and then to pilot those aircraft, they also have a special exemption to pilot them. That's been weight limited at 600 kilos. And the tragedy of all that is we've seen now for a few years, we've seen the RAOs attempting to negotiate to get out of that 600 kilo weight limit. And there's been some suggestion by CASA that it will be expanded to 760, and even as high as 1,500 if it's continued to be demonstrated as safe. What we would say is that RAOs is heading more and more to be looking like general aviation, flying heavier aircraft, applying to have night ratings, applying to do aerobatics, blah, 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 blah. It just seems lunacy to be on this, incredibly slow-moving SAAA process to actually generate another copy of what we would call general aviation VH registered and pilot licensed under Part 61. We think there's an opportunity in our submission with the way that the expirable instrument of 9555 is due for renewal in the 31st of January next year. There's time to now consider wrapping the industry all under one set of rules, that level the playing field. And we're not saying to RAOs, members and pilots that, you've got to come up to a higher standard. That's garbage. It's been demonstrated that, your rule set works for you guys. And on a medical front alone, if it works for you guys to fly privately, then why doesn't it work for a VH registered pilot to fly privately? And just harking back to something that I think it was Senator Patrick said it in the RRAT committee November 2 years ago. Basically, everything outside of medical is a training issue. You're either fit to fly or you're not. Now, that applies to whatever machine you fly. It could be a hot air balloon, it could be a RAOS machine, it could be a hang glider, it can be a powered aeroplane, it can be a glider. The reality is you're either fit or you're not. And everybody makes that decision before they climb into the cockpit and the controls of their aircraft, regardless. So, you know, that particular rule alone, Part 61, I think it's 385, applies to everybody. So really the trick here is to get the government and CASA to merge the two lots of standards together and come up with something that is equitable and fair to everyone. Open up
Tony,
the whole of aviation.
It certainly raises
to everybody.
I'll jump in, Tony. It raises some interesting questions, and there's, you know, as we would all recognise, and I think even the recreational community would recognise, the three fundamentals that appear to impact here. The first fundamental is that there needs to be an appropriate delivery of a industry-wide level playing field on aviation pilot medicals for the recreational pilot. Now, we hold some pretty firm views on that as AOPA, and they're very public. I've been advocating on this for 4.5 years, saying a self-certification medical standard for private aviation is needed. You even heard former CASA Principal Medical Officer, Dr. Robert Liddell, on last night's broadcast reiterating that CASA have virtually driven the recreational private sectors to destruction through just draconian over-regulation of pilot medicals. And the RAOs are a fantastic beacon and an example that self-certification works. So this needs to be adopted. So if we could achieve that first outcome and to get that medical standard implemented across the board, regardless of whether you're GA or RA, that creates an essential pathway. Of course, the second pathway that we need to look at is RAO's members are currently licensed or certificated with a recreational pilot certificate. And your submission, Tony, puts forward the recommendation that commencing from January next year, CASA could have the opportunity to start progressively converting all RPC holders so that they are in fact the holder of a CASA RPL. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I'd even go one step further, Ben. My view is that, you know, just look at what the acronym really stands for. Private Pilot License. You know, we've had it for, you know, decades and decades to basically fly some sort of flying machine. You know, we do not need separate acronyms to allow people to fly machines. So I would say that everybody should be grandfathered through to a PPL, all given a Part 61 license, and make sure that that Part 61 license demonstrates the level of training with which they have had. And just to put a sharper point on that, nobody goes out in the VH industry that I'm aware of and hires any plane whatsoever without the owner of that plane, whether it be an aero club or a private person, first and foremost dealing with their insurance company to ensure that the person who's going to fly it is capable and competent to fly it. And competency is something that's also covered under a Part 61 license. So if you take somebody who's only ever flown up to a 600 kilo aeroplane and nothing heavier, then maybe it's just a simple competency check that they can fly a Cessna 172, or they can go up to a Bonanza or whatever they want to fly. But it's a training issue. It's not a medical issue. It's not anything to do with their basic skills of being an aviator. They've already established those basic skills. So why not have everybody on the one license?
I'm going to jump in again because we've only got about another 25 minutes for tonight's broadcast. I think one of the other points we should make here is that, you know, and I might direct this to John, we often see in a lot of the communication that comes out of the RAOs, the fact that they put forward that there are 10,000 RAOs members. The truth of that situation is, yes, there are 10,000 RAOs members, but a fairly large number of these RAOs members already hold CASA licenses. That in many cases, they already have a PPL, but they're currently flying under that RAOs system because they wanted access to a simplified medical. And also they wanted to have access to potentially work on their own aircraft to get away from having to pay huge maintenance costs. And I certainly hear this in a lot of my travels. A lot of people contact me and talk to me about this particular paradigm, because obviously we're very outspoken on the medical reform front. We are large advocates for the incoming Part 43 reforms, which will introduce, and this is big news, guys, Part 43 reforms from CASA will bring into the VH community the ability for light sport aircraft owners and sport experimental aircraft owners to be able to get themselves a repairman certificate, and so that you'll be able to do the annuals on your aircraft. You'll be able to work on these airplanes yourself. And so we are moving closer and closer to the core regulation reforms that are needed to level this playing field. But John, if there's already a large community of people that have CASA licenses, how will the SAAA's proposal entice those people across back under a unified system?
Well, I guess from SAAA's perspective, I mean, we're not interested really in enticing people to come to SAAA or do anything else. I mean, we've got a bunch of people that are ex-SAAA members. They're out there, they're just flying their aircraft as individuals under the VH system. I think it comes down to what each of the organisations offer as a home and a place for aviators to enjoy what they do.
I might redirect the question there, John. The question I was asking was not about the SAAA, but the SAAA's proposal in this submission outlines that you would like to move, you'd like to transition these RPCs across to RPL, you'd like to transition these RAOs aircraft across to VH registered. Obviously, there are going to be those within the recreational environment that have come from the CASA system. What incentive will there be for these people to move back across under the Unified Casa Managed System?
Well, I guess it depends
if I
what
can
people
throw
want to do with
there.
their flying and with the licenses. But if they already hold a PPL or they've held a PPL, I would have thought that recognition of prior learning and certification, under a scheme that CASA hopefully could come up with, would allow a simple migration back into the VH system. So if people have let go of their PPLs in favour of an RPC, maybe there's a way for them to transition relatively simply. And I can't see why RPL, pardon the pun, recognition of prior learning, isn't applicable. I don't think there's really a need to entice. If you make it hard for people to transition back into VH, well, they won't be interested.
Obviously, one of the key issues here that I see is that, and I would love to see a survey conducted by CASA on this. I think that's actually something that really does need to be done. CASA needs to survey all PPL and RPL holders who also hold a CASA license, and to find out why they went to the self-administration model. And I think that we would find a very, very high percentage of those pilots have moved across because of the self-certification medical standards that allow pilots so much more flexibility and save them thousands of dollars from situations where AVMed just make their life impossible. So I think a reformed self-certification medical standard goes a great distance in helping bring pilots back into operating heavier aircraft, and of course back into controlled airspace and all these other benefits. Tony, over to you. You wanted to add some comments there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, look, that from our perspective, the primary driver why there are former PPL VH registered owners of aircraft have gone across to the RAL system is because they simply cannot get through the Class 2 and or the Class 2 basic medical system. So they've been prepared to park up their VH-owned Cessna or whatever in the shed and go across and put up with flying in some cases a lighter aircraft, but in a lot of cases not a lighter aircraft at all. A Cessna 152 is on the cusp in fact, there are Cessna 152s registered in RAOs. I know Mr. Carmody doesn't think so, but the truth of it is I've got photographs of one that is on the register. The reality here is people were being draconianly corralled through medical requirement and pushed out of VH and therefore PPL flying. It's absolutely an unbelievable act by a regulator to do this. But at the same time, the invisible barrier or the glass ceiling for the people that have gone or have started in that arena, they've got to go through a process of transiting back the other way, and that just costs those individuals money. Why can't we just have one medical standard across the board? As I said before, it doesn't matter what you fly. We all fly in the same skies. We all are aviators. And I'll just bring in another point. I know I've mentioned this before in various forums. The gliding fraternity have mentioned it before. Peter Sesko, the former president, has mentioned this in the RRAT committee. Millions upon millions of hours of VH registered glider flight, because that's what the gliders are, all VH registered. They've all just had self-cert medical, and nobody has died at the controls of a glider that's ever been proven. In 70 years, there is maybe, and I say a big maybe because it's never been proven, 3 potential accidents where the autopsy did not decide whether the person had died before the crash or as a result of the crash. So what I put out there is this simple notion, with the evidence is in existence, that VH pilots and gliders, by the way, can fly into controlled airspace. So why shouldn't anybody who's got a self-cert medical be able to do the same? Now, okay. I would advocate for every pilot to go into it.
Okay, so I just want to go back to this submission again. You've put in here to progressively, so the SAAA suggests the following practical transitions pathway to helping create this unified platform that you're seeking. And the first one is to progressively convert all RRAA recreational pilot certificate holders to a Part 61 recreational pilot's license, and that this could be done across a 2-year span. I think, Tony, I dare say I think that could actually be done a lot quicker, because I think you would find, and again, if CASA actually undertook a proper survey of the pilot community, we would find that there are already a significant number of CASA licensed pilots that are flying on that on the recreational system. So I think that there's a real, we've got to be careful not to look at the 10,000 member number as being the defining number. We really need to see what that breakdown would be. The second item that you've put here is either pathway the RAA flight schools to Part 141, so convert all the RAA schools into a 141 school. This would bring, I imagine this would bring a great deal of difficulty. I mean, one of the concerns that we've had is that the 141 framework, the 141, 142 framework really does need to be overhauled, because again, and I would say hats off to RAOs. What they've proven is that they've been able to train pilots within the RAOs framework to an RPL standard, and they've been able to do that with flight instructors that are not commercial pilots. And that is a fundamental difference between the two systems, that when you climb into an aircraft with a flight instructor in the RAOs world, you're not necessarily climbing into an aeroplane with a commercial flying instructor. They could actually be a private pilot that's done a flight instruction course with RAOs to be approved. And so there would take, Tony, I imagine there'd be some work in creating that system to bring that flight instruction community across into the CASA system. Your thoughts?
I might just chip
absolutely, in there. Not a great deal of work at all, Ben.
Which one wants the question?
The first. Yeah, I'll take the question if I can, because I've spoken to a lot of flight instructors here in the West who have done their whole career in flight instruction, and here's what needs to happen. Part 141 for CASA, it needs to be deleted as far as the content goes, and then everything that's in the RAOs manual needs to be inserted into the Part 141. Now that's going to sound pretty radical, but the reality is, in the VH instructional world, we have highly qualified testing officer type captains who are struggling to maintain their own medical at a Class 1 level to deliver this valuable service to the industry. And CASA has already recognised the fact that these guys are getting older. The new crew hasn't come behind. And to keep these guys in there with their skills and keep the industry going, CASA has already had to give an exemption to these very highly skilled people and bring their medical down to a Class 2 to be able to conduct that instruction. So here is the notion. If a highly skilled testing officer been flying for 50 years, the cream of the crop, teaching all of the other captains and assessing them, can be given an exemption to do it on a Class 2, then it absolutely stands to reason that any person who holds a Class 2 can be an instructor. So all we're really saying is that your instructional brigade, right across the board for VH and RAOs, minimum medical standard would be a Class 2, not a Class 1.
So just while you have to hold a commercial license. I'm going to fire it back over to John. I'm going to jump in, Tony. I'll jump in. Just before I jump over to you, John, I just want to read a comment that has been posted by Eddie. Eddie says, I have a PPL and an RPC, an RAO's registered aircraft, and a level 2 medical for CASA audit. All I want is a self-assessment medical and my own maintenance. I've done the RAO's maintenance course and the weight and balance course. I want a simple life. Well, I mean, John, Eddie's right. And I know I've made these statements before, and I know I've been confronted by the former RAO's CEO, Michael Linky, who publicly wanted to challenge me on it, but I think it's an accepted fact, and I'm pretty more willing to continue to stand by it. And that is, the vast majority of people that have gone into the RAOs have gone into the RAOs for two fundamental reasons. The first one is they are exposed to a CASA AVMED system that's broken. And I'm disappointed. I am very disappointed that instead of the industry working together to solve that AVMED challenge, and we're now solving that challenge. In the last 4.5 years, AOPA, SAAA, the AGAA, we've really taken on that challenge, not just for the general aviation industry. We've taken on that challenge for the entire industry, because we understand how important it is to fix that one fundamental that helps unlock everything. But pilots have had to come out of general aviation, have had to move across to RAOs, where they can self-assess to get away from thousands of dollars worth of annual costs and expenses, and Eddie's really amplifying that. The second thing is the ability to work on your own aircraft. And the Part 43 reforms, Eddie, that AOPA and SAAA and others have been really supporting CASA on, that's what this is all about. And this is the big fundamental difference, I think, culturally, between a lot of the organisations, is that I think our viewpoint, and I won't speak too broadly on behalf of the SAAA, but I think that I'm pretty certain that we're all on the same page here, that we really do feel that for the industry to succeed, we have to be unified in fighting down excessive, erroneous and unnecessary regulation, and seeing to it that we improve the overall central workflow of aviation so that we all benefit. Because I don't know how many times I've said this, the rising tide floats all boats, and we all benefit when we fix these things. So Eddie, I wouldn't give up on VH registered aviation just yet, because Part 43 is around the corner. I think that there's a lot of pressure mounting now on CASA with respect to these medicals. And I think that you'll be able to achieve these things under the CASA system. And I dare say you'll be able to do it a lot more cost effectively, because let's not forget, for everyone that will tune in and watch this video, you're not paying membership fees, you're not paying aircraft registration costs, you're not paying all those ancillary fees and charges to be under the CASA system, because we pay tax, and our taxes contribute to the funding of the Australian Aviation Safety Regulator, and they are actually there to do that job for us. And it is a bit of an affront that we almost have to pay a second, and in some cases a third time around, to get basic aviation regulation done. And so we're very much against it. We're going to continue that push. John, just to come back to the issue of the flight schools, trying to move these RAOS schools into a more formal CASA framework and bring that flight instruction community up. I dare say again, there would be a very high quantum of RAOs instructors that already hold, potentially are in fact CASA instructors under the GA system, but have probably moved across to the RAOs system to get away from the extraordinary costs of renewing instructor ratings and keeping current, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't doubt that that's the case at all. But really, to just make the point that we suggested that migrating to the Part 141 system was just one option. We suggested or a pathway that is modelled on the current RAOs flight training system. I mean, why on earth not? It works. So I think, you know, this comes back to my mind, the words at the end of Eddie's message there, the last words, a simple life. I mean, I think we all want a simple life. We want less complexity, so we can just get on with enjoying our aviation and doing so under clear, simple, common rules for everybody. It isn't simple when, if you're at a flight school, you're trying to mess with and operate within the VH system, Part 61 system, and the RAL system. I mean, does that make sense?
No,
and I think
it
if I were to add any words, if I, dare I suggest it to Eddie's remarks, a simple life, and I would add, and an equitable life. There's no doubt about it. You know, the situation we're in today, it isn't equitable. It's far from equitable. And that is,
if I could just add,
fix this, level the playing field, people will go to respective organizations as they feel more comfortable and won't be moving to organizations for probably, in some cases, the wrong reason. It could be cost, it could be medical or other, who knows. But with the level playing field, I feel you're creating unhealthy influences, which are not helpful when it comes to the safety outcomes we all strive for.
Well, John, a great example of that, and let's speak openly. And I mean, this is not about, and again, I say it again, it's not about a bash. We're not bashing RAOs. We're having a conversation about the way in which our industry is going to be regulated, the way in which our industry will be shaped, and the type of privileges and the types of rights that we will have as pilots and aircraft owners to go forward. So I think this debate is a very, very healthy debate. And if I could make one comment to everybody that is listening to this broadcast, we've a great deal to gain from constructive public debate. And nobody in the community should be shouting anyone down for openly having any level of conversation on these issues. In fact, we should be really promoting it and embracing it, because we've got the opportunity to work together to try and find a way and identify the best way that we can go forward as an industry that lowers the cost of participation, it increases and improves overall participation, and safeguards aviation for now and into the future. And so the issue that you raised, John, is a very important issue, and that is we need the entire industry in the same boat, facing the same direction, all rowing together in order to drive the types of reforms that we need in order to solve the aviation challenges that are currently sitting in front of us. And I know AOPA, SAAA, AGAA, we have done some enormous heavy lifting on the regulatory reform front in the last 4.5 years. And I really lament, imagine what we could have gotten done over this last 4.5 years if we had had the entire recreational aviation community sitting in the boat with us, fighting for self-certification medical standards, fighting for a level playing field on pilot licensing that eradicates this bullshit restriction that stops pilots flying into controlled airspace because of some arbitrary decision by some unelected official inside of CASA somewhere, solving the challenges around the rights of pilots and ensuring pilots are protected when things unfortunately go wrong. All these things we need to do as an industry, but we just can't do them with the industry split and with one side rowing in its own direction and the other going in the other. So it's far more fundamental than just a conversation on where do we want to go as an industry. This is really about the quintessential makeup of how we take aviation forward, or whether aviation in fact will be mired, I guess, in running in circles for another 20 years. I want to get back to the conversation here, because we're slowly working our way through your submission. You're saying here that you want to address the management of flight instructors as a consequence of the above points. The solution is to use the 141 requirements, a syllabus or RAA or a mix of flight instructors, but remove the requirement to hold a CPL. Progressively harmonise all instruction rules to the same level on occasion. I mean, I think we've partially covered this, but I think, you know, Tony, how do we move an entire community of flight instructors that may not hold a commercial pilot's license into a CASA system where today you need to be a commercial pilot in order to be a flight instructor?
Well, you have to change Part 141 to accommodate it. And as I said earlier, I think Part 41 has been almost the death of the GA instructional industry. The people I speak to who are at the end of their career basically thinking that there won't be an instructional industry in Australia within another 5 years because Part 141 is so administratively heavy. Despite what you'll have somebody from CASA tell you, and I have been told that by a senior executive from CASA, it's very easy, but it's not very easy at all, and it's full of traps, and it's full of legal liability and blah, 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 blah. The whole thing just needs to be erased, and Part 141 for the training of ab initio right the way through to navigation, basic navigation in visual flight conditions needs to be substituted with what is in the RAO's syllabus, and the people who instruct need to be no more highly qualified than what RAO's has been providing, because CASA has accepted that works. So therefore, it must be the minimum standard. So CASA and the government need to stop stuffing around creating these arbitrarily higher gold-plated standards. The rest of the world has moved on to fix all this stuff over the years, but we are lagging way, way behind. And just to go back to the SAAA thing, South Africa, across the ditch to the west, they scrapped their SAAA model and their existing equivalent of RAOs and rolled it all back into their primary act. And that's what we're saying. You know, nobody should be outside the primary act. And just another little nuance in our investigations. You know, Australia is a signatory to the ICAO Accord. The ICAO Accord says that only a country can assign a designator to an aircraft. So how is it that is RAOs a country? I mean, some in there would think so. I'm sure the former CEO thought he stood alone in his own country. But you know, regardless of that swipe, you know, it's just stupid. It's nonsensical to be doing what has been done. And I think if someone really wanted to put it to the test and take it to the federal court, I think you could find that what CASA did back in around 2000 in creating the CAO 9555 was actually illegal. And you know what? It's taken me 2 years to dig through and find the stuff, and I had to get pointers from a former executive of CASA to find it. Because they have gone to great lengths to hide it from scrutiny. And my feeling is that they literally, and I'll use your word, Ben, they bullshitted to the politicians who got hoodwinked into passing this and effectively they have done something that I think could be shown at the very, very least to be non-feasant on the same basis that the agricultural minister Ludwig was recently prosecuted by the beef industry. So you know, I put it out there that, you know, standing together, we need to look into the non-feasant behaviour of public officers within CASA, and now that court case has become common law. All public officers inside CASA who have not been doing the right thing, they really need to have a good hard look at themselves, because we're coming.
Industry certainly, Tony, is getting more vocal, and we can see it through the broadcast that we've been providing this last couple of months. More and more people are coming forward, and today you would be aware I've drafted a letter for the CASA board on some other issues which are just outstanding in terms of how they have possibly occurred and the conflicts of interest that have been created through having staff members now working inside of the regulator that come from organisations like RAOs that are now in key decision-making roles where they have conflicts and they shouldn't be in those positions, and it gives rise to all kinds of problems. Obviously not the topic for tonight's discussion. John, I'm going to bring it back to you. One of the arguments that I've always heard put forward with respect to the concept of a reunification of the industry under central regulation is that CASA would not be able to cope with having to look after the recreational industry. I mean, I have my own personal views on this, which I just think that's just, it's a ridiculous statement. CASA are a very large organisation and they actually have considerable resources. And I think that they very much enjoyed being able to not have to look after things because let's face it, if you're a large government organisation and you get to divert your budget that you were spending on one thing and you now get to push it into something else, that's obviously a good thing. But do you feel that CASA has the capacity to be able to look after the return of some of these recreational pilots back under the CASA system?
Face value, I don't see why not. I mean, let's face it, if they operated just one set of rules and they wouldn't have to, in effect, be responsible for two sets, I think it would simplify things. I think there would be a lot more clarity around how the activities of the aviators can be monitored. You talked earlier on about aircraft flying overweight and other matters like that, aircraft that possibly are flying outside of the approved conditions or maybe not even approved to fly in the conditions. Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, it's a large organisation, as you said, a lot of very capable people in there. It's just a matter of how their time and their efforts and their knowledge are applied. I don't see any.
So I think there's approximately 12 staff or something. I think that's the number. There's around 12 staff that work for RAOs. And I think that needs to be kept into perspective as well, that when we hear these statements that CASA could not do this work, well, you know, at the moment it's being done with 12 staff in an office out of Canberra. It's hard to believe that CASA is an organisation with upwards of $200 million a year of funding and 1,000 staff or 800 staff, you'd have to think that they've got the capacity to deal with this. I don't believe it would put that much of a burden on CASA if a self-certification medical standard is finally introduced, which it should be. And those from CASA that are watching the program tonight, and I know that you are watching it because I do get the phone calls, you know, we really do want that self-certification medical delivered sometime before middle of next year. It would be a huge relief, regardless of what outcome occurs with respect to recreational licensing and aircraft registrations. That the medical alone would be a huge step forward. Tony, you've listed in here as one of the other action points is that you would like to progressively harmonise maintenance rules for aircraft used for private operations within 12 months and obviously move them across from the RAOS system. Again, with Part 43 around the corner, there is actually a really viable pathway that will see this happen and probably happen with quite an easy transition.
Yes, just before I answer that, I just want to add to that last question, if I may. I sat in CASA's offices about 20 months ago when all 9 SAAA groups were summoned to a meeting to discuss funding. And I can say categorically that CASA said they had the capacity in their Clark area, so pilot licensing and aircraft registration, to handle all flying machines in Australia. They you know, some of us thought they might not have enough call signs, and there probably isn't enough combination call signs, but it would be very simple to change that computer program and add another letter or a number as part of our heritage to the RAOs into called to privately registered aircraft. One's not necessarily being used particularly for hire and reward. But so CASA themselves know they can do this. And just also harking back to something that Ken Kinane from AMROBA has told us in the past, back in the mid-90s, CASA only had a staff of about 350, which grew to about 400 before he left CASA in or about 2000. Today's CASA numbers are up over 800. And yet, in the last 20 years, we've seen the relative demise of VH-registered aircraft. And I think that could be proved very easily if CASA was required to do a survey on how many registered aircrafts actually had an active maintenance release. And it wouldn't be very hard, because all those certified aircraft have to have a maintenance release issued by a Car 30 workshop or a LAMI. And they could get that information just by surveying the businesses, the LAMI businesses, basically. So, what was your last question? The next question you wanted me to answer? I forgot.
My last question outside of the maintenance, and I'll just touch on the maintenance again.
Part
the
43, yes.
The SAAA submission is saying to harmonise those maintenance.
Ben, you've seen the documentation as we have about what Part 43 is bringing to the table. It's damn near a copy of what the RAOS has already. It's just the different levels have a different name and probably a slightly different descriptor on what those levels of maintenance allow you to do. We're very excited by Part 43 because we see that as part of the levelling of the playing field. But once again, CASA is dragging its feet. And, I've been told by a CASA officer in this area that, SAAA does not need Part 149 and to become an SAAA, because once Part 43 is up and running, it'd just be more surplus regulation. I mean, we don't
Tony,
get anything out of it.
I'll jump in there, and I think for those that are listening and watching the broadcast, one of the fundamentals of 43 is that when you apply for the authority so that you can conduct the maintenance on your LSA or your sport and experimental aircraft, there's going to be no need for you to pay membership fees or renewal fees or any other ongoing fees. You'll participate in a CASA approved course. You'll be able to obtain that authority so that you can work on that aircraft. But once you've got that authority, that belongs to you. It doesn't belong to an association. It doesn't belong to a private company who then charges you for the privilege of holding it every 12 months or forcing you to have to go and get it renewed every 12 months just so that can create some revenue. This is an authority that you will have so that you can look after your aircraft. And I think this is really part of that fundamental discussion about creating the lowest possible cost of participation for the industry to maximize the number of people participating, but to ensure that the community has the best possible resources that we as an industry can deliver for them. I think Part 43, if CASA can get the damn thing delivered, Part 43 would be a significant achievement for the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. It would be one of the first reform pieces I've seen in 5 years that, in all honesty, will have a huge impact on helping improve the overall condition and health of the aviation industry. Tony agrees. John agrees. Everyone's like, yes, we know.
It would be nice to see the same principles carry forward into Part 61, wouldn't it?
Well, I think I can see that. I can see that this is actually starting to happen, John. And I think that, hats off to SAAA and AOPA and AGAA and the other partners who have been relentless. I'm sure that there are some within the industry that must look at it and go, God, does AOPA ever shut up on these issues? Well, guess what? No, we don't. We're fighting for you. Whether you realize it or not, we're fighting for you. And we are going to achieve for you a system at the end of the day that's going to deliver you the easiest, most affordable, low impost way of participating in aviation, because that's what it's about. And I think that, that's been the focus. I know 43 is a big focus on that, and I just commend you both again for the SAAA support behind the scenes on seeing that brought forward, because it'll help SAAA members enormously. It's going to help thousands of RAAus members who want to fly heavier aircraft. And Tony, we hear this across the industry. How many RAAus pilots I've spoken to that have said, Ben, if you can just get that medical reform done, I want to own an RV7, I want to own an RV8, I want to own an RV10. I'm a recreational pilot. Why can't I own that aircraft and maintain it? Well, under these new rules, you're going to be able to do that. And that's when I think we're really going to see private sport and recreational aviation really start to take off again. So that's it's really positive moving forward. Okay, let's just drag this thing back on point for our last 5 to 10 minutes here. We've just gone through this at a very supernumerary type bloody level here. I've tried to pick a few of the issues out. I'm going to be putting a link on the AOPA Facebook page to this submission, and I really do invite people from across the industry to download a copy of it and have a read through it. And if you're from the RAAus, if you're a member of RAAus, I really do invite you to download it and have a look at it, and to look at it on merit. Don't go into it thinking, these guys are trying to ruin my fun. Nobody from AOPA, SAAA, or otherwise are trying to ruin your fun. We all want you to fly. We want you to have your freedom to fly. We want you to have your participation without unnecessary cost and restriction. That's what we're all about. But have a look at it. And if you agree, consider getting behind the association who's driving to make this happen. And I would recommend, sometimes it might just be send the SAAA an email. Send the SAAA an email and say, guys, I agree with this. I think it would be fantastic. Because I'll tell you how that's important. When we go and we meet with CASA and we have a conversation with them about wanting to unify the industry and provide a more affordable framework, and we want to encourage CASA to simplify their system and to provide that simplified system so that everyone will want to use it. And that's a strange concept. And John's looking at me, what's Ben saying? People are going to want to use the CASA system. That's right, John. Where we're heading is a regulator that is reformed, a regulator that provides a system that we actually want to be part of. And I think that that's when the trust, the respect, and the participation between industry and regulator will really get moving again. And I think the industry will really energize around that. But if you believe that this is a pathway, make it known. Send an email to the SAAA. Send an email to tony.white@saaa.com or john.smith@saaa.com and put your thoughts. Let them know, because they are, as I've said earlier in this conversation, they are actually advocating for a really sensible pathway. And I know it's probably got a little bit of unfair media over the last few days, guys, because people don't quite understand what the thinking is behind it, but a little bit more conversation publicly and encourage people to be part of it might also help. Any closing comments from either of you on your submission before we wrap up tonight? John,
I think it's all said. It's all said, mate. I think it's a level playing field, make it equitable, allowing people to carry on, simple life and an equitable life. I think Eddie was spot on.
Well done, Tony.
And I think I would say just one last thing. Don't just send me an email. If what we've been excites you, and if you're an RAAus member and this is what you want, and we help you get through to heavier aircraft and better training for night ratings and aerobatics and formation flying and all those things which are fun, send also an email to your CEO and tell him to start representing your feelings at the board level of your own organisation. I mean, for far too long, it would appear that your RAAus board is not listening to its own rank and file, and typical of all of us, in all organisations, and even us as citizens of Australia, we're all generally politically lazy, and we don't tell our people who are running things what we want. So, start melting down the RAO's email box and tell them what you want.
Well, just on that, I should put it out there that, Tony, you and I have had this conversation earlier, but we held an incredible summit back in 2018 in which we brought together the general aviation industry. We had like 130 odd participants. There was 36, 37 organizations that were involved. We were right in the, I mean, you just wouldn't read about it. We were right at the start of planning for that second summit as the COVID restrictions hit, and almost overnight, boom, everything was parked. I think this modern technology, by way of video conferencing, all the associations are doing this now. We're probably, let's face it, COVID-19 has made each of our organizations far more accessible. There's more information being shared with members and industry supporters than ever before. And this is allowing us right into your living room, on your iPad, your iPhone, or your computer to have a conversation with you about the things that we do Monday to Friday. But we are going to put together our second General Aviation Summit, and we'll be again reaching out to RAOs and the other bodies and trying to bring everybody together to start looking at some of these key issues and finding a pathway in which we can advocate them forward. So, gentlemen, I thank you very much for all the work that you do on behalf of the sport and recreational community. And obviously, I understand for some it'll be a controversial topic. I think for most people, I've already got a lot of private text messages have come in whilst we've been having this discussion with people saying, look, Ben, it's right. A simplified medical, a simplified maintenance and ownership platform, and the ability to get more people involved has got to be a good thing. So thank you very much, guys. And I look forward to catching up again with you very, very shortly.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
Okay, so another Facebook, we've rebranded. It's another AOPA live news and discussion topic for this evening. We're going to be back next week with another discussion on Tuesday, and we are going to have two extra programs for next week as well. We have our conversation with Senator Susan McDonald. I'm looking forward to the opportunity of sitting down with Senator McDonald one-on-one and being able to put a whole range of questions forward regarding the state of Australian general aviation and exactly what she and her National Party colleagues intend on doing to bring about some meaningful change. I'll also have the opportunity to catch up with David Young. David will be joining us to have some conversation about what the 2020 budget has in store for aviation businesses across the country. So we'll be learning more about what general aviation businesses can get access to, the things that they can write off, and the ways in which we can harness the benefits of the budget, which was launched yesterday. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Lastly, if you do get the chance and you are supporting what AOPA Australia is trying to achieve, not only ourselves, but with our partners in the SAAA, I do warmly welcome you to take up a membership to the association. Every single one of our members helps power our ability to run our advocacy agenda, and we certainly do welcome you to join and become part of our growing organisation. You can access memberships online. It's just on the ticker at the bottom of the screen there, www.aopa.com.au/membership. And with that, good evening.